video, we want to take a look at the question which comes up surprisingly often. When recording expenses in QuickBooks, is it a check or is it a bill? So if you're working on the home page in QuickBooks, the Write Checks icon is here in the banking section. Enter Bills is up here in Vendors section. With entering bills, there's two steps. With writing checks, there's only one. Let's look at Write Checks real quick. Now, you can also do this from the check register. It creates exactly the same transaction. It's just a different way of looking at it. If I create a check here to, let's say, Patent Hardware Supplies, and go ahead and write my check for $50, and I'm going to use supplies expense as my account, and that's the complete transaction right there. When I save this, let me just use this icon right here. Okay, so it's saved, even though it's still open on the screen. Now that I've saved that, I have deducted the $50 from my checking account balance, and if I look at a profit and loss statement, it's going to show a $50 expense for supplies expense. So what if we decide to create a bill? Do that from the icon here. I'll still use Patent Hardware Supplies there on the invoice that he gives to me. Another $50 supplies expense. And I'm going to save that. Yeah, I'll leave it open, but it's saved. So now that that transaction is saved, this is the entry that it makes. I've added $50 to my expense. If I run a profit and loss statement, I'll see that. We'll do that here in just a minute. But I haven't affected my bank account at all. The other side of this entry is what in accounting is called an accounts payable. That is, I owe Patent Hardware Supplies $50. If I close the bill and I open my vendor center, and there it is right there, Patent Hardware Supplies, and you see the balance for that vendor is $50. Now, when I want to pay that amount, then I'm going to go to Pay Bills. I'm going to find that vendor and that bill, Patent Hardware Supplies, $50. Click on the button to pay the bill, and then from here I could either print the check, go back to the Pay Bills window, or say, I'm going to say done. So why would you want to do that? What's the difference between entering a bill and entering a check? Well, entering the bill lets me date the bill in a particular month and have that expense show on my profit and loss statement, but not actually pay it until later. And when I pay it later, it doesn't affect the expense. Here, let me show you something. If I go back to vendors and find patent, and this bill payment check for, where is it? For $50, right? Nope, that's not it. It's right here. Okay, the bill payment check here for $50. Let's just put a different date on that. Here in the sample file, today's date is December 15th, 2023. All right, let's move that out to January 15th, 2024. Okay, so we're not paying the check until 30 days later, we're paying it next year. And then let's look at a profit and loss report. And this is for December. We'll go down here in the expense accounts until we find supplies. Here, let me make this a little bigger. Might be easier for you to see. All right, so here's supplies expense. We have supplies expense of $100. What makes that up? The check that we wrote, which posts the expense immediately, $50. The bill is not paid yet because we're only looking at December 1 to December 15, but the expense for that $50 is still here. If I changed the dates on this report, to January of so the whoops, wrong date. There we go. To January of next year, when I wrote the check to pay the bill, there's no transactions in supplies expense because the check that I wrote only pays the debt that I owe the vendor. It doesn't create another expense. Okay, let me show you one more thing. I help people fix this all the time. So what I'm going to do is the check that paid that bill, I'm going to delete that. And QuickBooks was telling me it's not a good idea, which is true, but we're going to do that for illustrative purposes here. So I still owe Patton Hardware the $50. You can see the balance right there. What happens is sometimes, if you use this sometimes, but not all the time, you're not real clear on the purpose, then someone will create a bill, and then when they get the paper bill in the mail from the vendor, they'll come here and they'll write a check to the vendor for the $50 and save that. Well, now what happens? Now what happens if we go to a profit and loss report? Again, I'm going to make that a little bigger, make it easier for you to see. We're going to scroll down here to supplies expense, and what do we see? We have $150 in supplies expense. We have the first check that we wrote at the beginning of the video. We have the bill that we created, and that bill is still there, still unpaid. And then we created another check thinking we were paying that bill, but we weren't because we created a regular check. We would have to go through the pay bills process in order to pay that bill. If we look over at the vendor center, and there's Patton right there, we still owe them the $50. So we've overstated our expense. We've created a $50 expense that we don't really have, and we've left on the books a $50 debt to a vendor that we don't have. So it's imperative that you always use the right procedure. If you're keeping things simple and you're writing checks and you want them to post that expense right when you write the check, then here you are. Write checks. That's what you want. If for some reason you want because the expense maybe matches up with some income or something like that, we can talk more about that in another video, but sometimes you want the expense in a certain month, even though you're not going to pay it until later. That's when you use the bill. But if you use the bill, don't forget when you actually write the check to come through pay bills. All right, so hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching. We'll have some more videos soon. Thanks.